What is up, everybody? We're back. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. We are, I don't know, 2/3 of the way through this collection of FBI documents, which is really a collection of Mexican investigation documents. But this is technically the FBI's official version of events. So let's continue on. Character and reputation of Gutierrez. I hope you listened to yesterday's episode. On February 17, 1964, T5 advised that a check of the Identification Division of the Metropolitan Police of the Federal District revealed that one Pedro Gutierrez Valencia had a driver's license issued to him in 1938 and again in 1942. It was also determined that a thumbprint of Pedro Gutierrez Valencia, which he had affixed to his letter dated December 2nd, 1963, directed to President Lyndon B. Johnson, is identical with the right thumbprint of Gutierrez, which is on file at the Identification Division of the Metropolitan Police in connection with the request by Gutierrez to carry a firearm, and also in connection with the issuance to him of driver's licenses. T5 advised on February 20th, 1964, that the records of all Mexican police and investigative agencies at Mexico City do not contain any information of a derogatory nature concerning Gutierrez. On February 20th, 1964, T25, a confidential source, stated that Pedro Gutierrez Valencia enjoys a good reputation in his neighborhood and is considered to be a person of good conduct and wholesome habits. Information concerning Arturo Gaona Elias. On February 25th, 1964, T2 received information that a beige-colored Renault automobile with a 1962-63 Federal District of Mexico license plates number 255861 was observed on that date entering the premises of the Cuban Embassy at Mexico City. On February 27th, 1964, T4 advised that he ascertained through a check of the records of the Traffic Department of the Federal District of Mexico that a 1959 Renault motor number 744492 was registered on April 11th, 1962 in the name of Arturo Gaona Elias, Calle Tolteco number 53, Mexico City, with 1962-63 license plate number 265861 for Federal District of Mexico. The only other data appearing in the Traffic Department file is that the 1959 Renault is a sedan model, as the color of the vehicle was not specified. On February 27th, 1964, T25 advised that inquiries at Calle Tolteca and at various businesses established in the area of that address failed to develop any information concerning Gaona Elias or above-described 1959 Renault automobile. Source advised that the structure numbered 53 on Calle Tolteca is actually a cow stable and unsuitable for human habitation. The address is located in an extremely poor, low-class area of Mexico City, which is frequented by thieves. Inquiry was also conducted at Calle Tolteca number 53, Colonia Industrial at Calle Tolteca in Colonia Ixtapalapa, and at Calle Tolteca in Colonial San Pedro, without obtaining information which would aid in identifying Arturo Gaona Elias. T5 advised that a check of driver's license records at the Federal District Traffic Department revealed no evidence that anyone identifiable with Arturo Gaona Elias had been issued a driver's license in the Federal District of Mexico. Source further advised that Traffic Department records do not show that license number 265861 had been issued as of that date for the current 6465 Federal District license plates, and that license number 265861 is a 62-63 Federal District license number. Source further reported that no record could be located at the Central Division of the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs that anyone by the name of Arturo Gaona Elias had been reported to that division as a representative of any foreign nation in Mexico. The source also advised that no information identifiable with Arturo Gaona Elias could be located in the files of the Identification Division, Metropolitan Police of the Federal District. T2 advised on March 2nd, 1964, that Pedro Gutierrez Valencia stated that he had never known or heard of Arturo Gaona Elias. The information which follows was furnished by T2. Additional investigation at Mexico City, which included a check of the United States visa records and the files of the National Automobile Theft Bureau, failed to develop further identifying information concerning Arturo Gaona Elias until March 4th, 1964. Antonio Severin de la Mora, official of the Mexican Social Security Institute, reported that the files of the agency included a record for Arturo Gaona Elias and his wife, Irma Mendeville de Gaona as residents in the year 1957 at Calle Zaragoza in Ciudad Obregón, Sonora. T26, a confidential source who has furnished reliable information in the past, advised that on March 11th, 1964, Arturo Gaona Elias had been located in Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, where he now resides at Calle Nuevo Leon 743. He also advised sources that he had sold the 59 Renault automobile, motor number 744492, to Ronaldo Romero Felix, who lives at Calle Sinola number 234. Sources advised that on March 11, 64, Ronaldo Romero Felix was located in Ciudad Obregón and advised he had sold the above-mentioned Renault automobile in July of 1961 to Claudio Oliveros of Mexico City. He described Oliveros as having a questionable reputation as an automobile dealer, and related to Oliveros took the Renault to Mexico City, where he was believed to have turned it over to Ernesto Mitrani, a Cuban who was engaged in the automobile business. He advised that Ernesto Mitrani has a brother by the name of Isaac Mitrani, who also might be an automobile buyer. According to Romero, this automobile was to have been sold by Ernesto Mitrani at Mexico City, or to have been sent to an American by the name of Guillermo Willie, who deals in automobiles in Chihuahua. Inquiry concerning Ernesto Mitrani. On March 13, 64, Margarita Munguia, Visa Section, United States Embassy, Mexico City, made available visa file data concerning Ernesto Mitrani Levy, reflecting that he was born December 29, 1936 at Havana, Cuba, and that he was the holder of Cuban passport number 26367, issued December 1959 with an expiration date in 1964. The Visa card contained a photograph of Ernesto Mitrani, and he was described on this card in January of 61 as being 5'7" in height, weighing 175 pounds, of fair complexion, brown hair, and green eyes. On March 17, 64, photographs of Ernesto Mitrani Levy were exhibited to Pedro Gutierrez Valencia, who stated that the photographs of Mitrani definitely do not depict the Cuban he saw in the company of an American at the Cuban embassy on or about October 1, 63. Gutierrez advised he believes that the Cuban observed him at the Cuban embassy was not an employee of that embassy because this person had his late-model Renault automobile parked on Calle Tacubaya in an area which is used by the general public for parking. He pointed out that many officials and employees of the Cuban embassy parked their cars on Calle Francisco Marquez in an area reserved for their use. Gutierrez stated he believes that he would have no difficulty whatsoever identifying the Cuban if he ever observed a photograph of this person, because he has the appearance of the Cuban better fixed in his mind than the appearance of the American he considered to have been Oswald. T19 advised on March 18, 1964, that Ernesto Mitrani Levy, employee of the Casa Vogue ladies' wear shop Calle Maduro, number 20, Mexico City, advised that about 2 years ago he was engaged in buying and selling used automobiles in Mexico. He affirmed, however, that he is certain he did not buy a 59 Renault sedan from Claudio Oliveros, explaining that Oliveros formerly operated a used car lot in Mexico City, but due to Oliveros' bad character and alleged fraudulent activities, he had been forced to close down the business and reportedly had left Mexico City for his home in Guadalajara, Mexico. Mitrani also mentioned that he had been employed in the Cuban embassy in Mexico City until 59. However, he was unable to furnish any information concerning any possible employee of the Cuban embassy who might have had a 59 beige-colored Renault in his possession in October 63 or in February of 64. Mitrani stated that it is common practice for persons in Mexico to buy an automobile and leave it registered in the name of a prior owner to avoid payment of sales taxes. He said that the 59 Renault may have changed hands many times, since it originally was purchased by Arturo Gaona Elias of Ciudad Obregón, Sonora in 1959. Upon recontact in March 24, 64, Mitrani advised he had checked the incomplete records he still possessed for the period he was in the used car business and had located no record of a purchase of a 1959 Renault from Claudio Oliveros or anyone else. Mitrani advised that he had spoken with his brother Isaac Mitrani in an effort to determine whether or not he might have a record of the transaction involving the aforementioned Renault, but his brother likewise could locate no record involving the 59 Renault automobile. Further interview of Gutierrez. T2 advised as follows. On February 20th, 64, Gutierrez was shown a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald, which had appeared in Life magazine and which depicts Oswald passing out pro-Cuban literature on a street in New Orleans, Louisiana. With respect to a profile photograph of Oswald showing his right arm extended to his torso from the waist up, Gutierrez advised that it does not appear familiar to him and that he cannot say that this photograph in any way resembles the American seen by him at the Cuban embassy on October 1st. He explained that during his brief encounter with the American and Cuban on October 1st, 63, had at no time observed the profile view of either the American or the Cuban. Gutierrez agreed that a mistaken identification from newspaper photographs of Oswald, which he saw almost 2 months later, would be very possible. He insisted, however, that he does not believe he is mistaken in his identification of Oswald. In order to more readily pinpoint the date he had been at the Cuban embassy and observed the Cuban and the American on March 2nd, 64, Gutierrez made available a listing of 260 names of individuals concerning whom he had conducted credit investigations for the Palacio de Hierro department store for the period September 1st, 63 to October 25th, 63, who were approved for credit. He stated this list represents the basis for his pay as credit investigator because he is paid on an individual case basis for each person investigated. He pointed out that he is paid only for those applicants who are approved for credit and that no records are maintained by the department store of the names of the persons who are rejected for credit. Among those names mentioned are the names of 30 persons investigated for credit by Gutierrez during the period from September 27th to October 3rd. Gutierrez explained that no specific data appears on this list, which would identify the exact date he conducted the individual investigation on each of the 30 persons listed, but that he had estimated that the names of the 17th and 18th individuals listed would have been conducted on or about October 1st, 1963. He advised that the names of Josefina Lorenzana Hernandez and her Fyodor Ricardo Lorenzana Rubin are the 17th and 18th names on this listing. Gutierrez pointed out that the names of Lorenzana Hernandez and Lorenzana Rubin are significant in that these persons were the subjects of his investigation in Coyoacan on October 1st, 63, and the appearance of these names on the pay sheet in a numerical sequence indicating that the investigations were conducted on or about October 1st, 1963, further substantiates information to the effect that he conducted the credit investigation of these persons on October 1st, 1963, as he recalled that he had been at the Cuban embassy just prior to conducting the investigation on the Lorenzanas. Gutierrez stated that he had given much thought to any other possible means of pinpointing the exact date he was at the Cuban embassy, but had not arrived at any additional means of establishing that he was there on October 1st, 63, other than from his personal recollection and the fact he conducted a credit investigation of the aforementioned Josefina Lorenza Hernandez and her father, Ricardo Lorenza Rubin, on that date. In furnishing further details regarding his reported visit to the Cuban embassy on or about October 1st, 63, Gutierrez advised he had departed from the consular section of the Cuban embassy through the rear door leading into the patio or garden section of the premises and departed from the patio area through the main entrance on Calle Francisco Marquez. Gutierrez stated it was his impression that the unidentified Cuban and the person identified by him as Oswald had left the building in the embassy compound where the Cuban ambassador had his quarters rather than the consular building, which is a separate edifice. He said he could not be sure that the Cuban and the American had not left the consular building, but when he was bumped by the Cuban, it seemed to him that the Cuban and the American were coming more from the direction of the residence than from the consular building. On April 25th, 64, front view and profile photos of Horacio Duran Navarro were exhibited to Pedro Gutierrez Valencia, who stated that these photographs of Duran in no way resemble the unknown Cuban he observed on or about October 1st, 63, in the company of the American exiting the premises of the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. Gutierrez pointed out that he feels that the data he had previously provided had exhausted his means of substantiating his allegations. T2 advised as follows: on March 7, 64, an official of the Mexican Federal Automobile Registration Bureau, Mexico City, advised that WFARB file number 193630 contains the following information concerning Arturo Gaona Elias and a 1959 Renault automobile registered to him. A 1959 Renault Dauphine four-door sedan, motor number 744492, serial number 5401098, was assembled in Mexico by the automobile assembly factory known as Autos Francesa S.A. Incorporated. The vehicle model number 1090 was sold in 1959 to an automobile agency known as Distributors Sonoras de Auto Francesa, located at the Avenida Miguel Alaman number 242. According to WFARB file, this vehicle was sold by the aforementioned automobile distributor to Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, On December 5th, 1959, to Arturo Gaona Elias, Calle Tolteca, number 53. Information from Claudio Oliveros. This information, which follows, was provided by T19. On April 7th, 1964, Claudio Oliveros was located at a Mexico City automobile parking lot at Parque España, number 5, and advised as follows. Oliveros stated emphatically that he did not buy a 59 Renault automobile from Ronaldo Romero, a used car dealer of Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, in 1961. Oliveros said that during 61 he was hospitalized in Mexico City for an operation, and during that time period he made no trips to Ciudad Obregón, Sonora to buy used cars. Oliveros stated that he could only recall having purchased 2 Renault automobiles in the Ciudad Obregón area in the past. One of these automobiles was a used Renault, which he purchased in 60 from the Renault car agency in Ciudad Obregón, and the other was a Renault automobile he purchased from an unknown farmer in the Ciudad Obregón area, also in the year 60. Oliveros claimed that he is well acquainted with Ronaldo Romero and that this individual is known locally around Ciudad Obregón by the nickname El Rey. Oliveros advised that Ronaldo Romero is mistaken if he stated that he sold a Renault automobile to Oliveros in 1961, because Oliveros has never purchased a Renault automobile from Ronaldo Romero. The following data was provided by T2. On April 15, 1964, Claudio Oliveros, who stated he resides at Avienda Ejército Nacional, number 1049, apartment number 301, Mexico City, related that following his previous interview on April 7, 64, he had recalled that he purchased a Renault automobile in Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, Mexico in about July of 61 and transported this vehicle to Mexico City, where he sold the car to a Mr. Duran, who was employed at a furniture manufacturing establishment. Oliveros vaguely recalled the buyer of this vehicle either resided or at his place of business in the Colonia del Valle section of Mexico City. He also recalled this individual had a brother who claimed he was married to an American girl. T23 advised it had been determined from observation that Horacio Duran Navarro, the husband of Sylvia Tirado de Duran, operates a 1962 maroon 4-door Volvo automobile bearing 1964 to 65 Federal District of Mexico license plate number 305118. T2 advised that on April 24, 64, Claudio Oliveros stated he had learned from a former associate in the used car business that an automobile sales receipt still in the possession of the latter clearly shows that Oliveros sold a 59 Renault number 744492 to a Mr. Duran at Mexico City in 61. Oliveros stated this sales receipt was signed by Duran, but the signature was somewhat illegible and he was unable to read the full name. It was brought to the attention of Oliveros that records of the Mexican Federal Automobile Bureau indicate the motor number of the 1959 Renault under consideration is 744492. Oliveros stated that he is certain that the motor number he provided is correct according to the sales receipt, which he personally had examined, and he indicated that he is convinced that this is the vehicle which formerly was the property of Arturo Gaona Elias of Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, Mexico, which he, Oliveros, had purchased in 61 in Ciudad Obregón. On April 25, 1964, Oliveros advised that he had recalled that the 1959 automobile had been sold to the aforementioned Mr. Duran at a lamp manufacturing and sales establishment known as Lamparas Duran Lamps, located on the Colonia del Valle area of Mexico City. Inquiries concerning the Duran family. On April 27, 64, T25 ascertained that Lamparas Duran is located at Calle Amores, number 327A, Mexico City, and is operated by one Mario Carrazzo, who stated he had purchased the business from Lydia Duran. Source advised that the business apparently employed only 3 persons. On April 29, 1964, T25 advised that he had ascertained that Lydia Duran is a widow and has 1 or 2 brothers. On April 27, 1964, T5 advised he had established that Lydia Duran was born March 18, 1928, at Chihuahua, Mexico, and that her full name, according to Spanish usage, is Lydia Duran Navarro. At the time the issuance of the Mexican passport in 59, she was married to Raul Flores Guerrero. T2 advised that on May 7, 64, Claudio Oliveros examined front view and profile photographs of Horacio Duran Navarro and immediately identified these photographs as those of the individual whom he had sold a 1959 Renault automobile at Mexico City in July of 61. Oliveros also examined a photograph of Ruben Duran Navarro and identified this photograph as that of the brother of Horacio Duran Navarro. After examining these photographs, Oliveros recalled he had known the Duran family about 10 years ago when they resided on Calle Panuco in Mexico City, and late in 1932 or 62, he had encountered Ruben Duran Navarro at the international airport in Mexico City and was told by Duran at that time that he was taking a flight to visit some of the European Iron Curtain countries, possibly Russia. On May 7th, 64, David Alcon, a Mexico City resident with residence at Calle Fernandez Gonzalez, number 47, advised that Horacio Duran Navarro, the husband of Sylvia Tirado de Duran, currently operates a red four-door Volvo automobile. Alcon stated that Duran also owns a 59 Renault automobile, which was from Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, and had been purchased by Duran at Mexico City in 1961. Alcon recalled that Duran experienced difficulty in licensing the vehicle and mentioned that he had to correspond with previous owner in Ciudad Obregón in order to secure additional data concerning the vehicle. Alcon affirmed that this 1959 Renault is a light gray color and definitely is not beige in color. He said this car is currently stored at Mexico City Repair Garage after having been involved in an accident, and Duran has indicated was not able to financially pay for the repairs of the vehicle. Alcon stated to the best of his knowledge that Duran has maintained possession of this car since he purchased it in 61. Alcon stated that he maintains a contractual relation with Horacio Duran Navarro for the interior decoration of houses designed by Alcon, and also is well acquainted with Ruben Duran Navarro, a brother as well as one sister who is known to Alcon as Lynn. Concerning Lynn, Alcon related that she is a widow and until about 1 year ago operated lighting fixtures known as Lampuris Duran. Alcon stated that Sylvia Tirado Duran, the wife of Horacio Duran Navarro, was formerly employed in the consular section of the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, and the 1959 Renault, which had been the property of Horacio Duran Navarro since 61, has undoubtedly been used by the family for transportation to and from the Cuban embassy on numerous occasions. Alcon made reference to the fact that he voluntarily had appeared at the United States Embassy, Mexico City on December 9th, 63, at which time he reported that his contacts with Horacio Duran Navarro had left him with the impression that contacts between Sylvia Tirado de Duran and Oswald related only to the latter's application for a visa, and that her contact with him was slight. On May 7, 64, Alcon advised that his subsequent contacts with Horacio Duran Navarro have not led him to believe the latter ever had any contact with Oswald, and Sylvia Duran's contacts with Oswald related to anything more than Oswald's application for a visa at the Cuban embassy. Allegation by Hilario Rojas Villanueva. Basis for inquiry. In an undated letter directed to Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, which was contained in an envelope postmarked December 31st, 1963 at Guadalajara, Mexico, the following is recorded as translated from the Spanish language. I ask you to forgive these few bold lines addressed to so distinguished a person. Mr. Robert, I am a Mexican by race and nationality. Also, Mr. Robert, I am communicating with you because I do not trust anyone in the matter I intend to deal with. I am referring to the death of your brother, perhaps. My information may prove quite helpful, even though various officials of the United States may be involved and affected by it. I, your servant, am willing to identify them. I will tell you only later. However, with patience, it concerns the plan which I never thought would be carried out. I used to be a friend of Lee Oswald, and I also know Albert, as well as 3 more people. I knew about the plan, but I never thought that it would turn out to be a true plan. I lost their friendship because I did not accept to introduce communist propaganda into my Mexico. To be more specific, I separated from them and never saw them again until I found out about the death of the president, your brother. Forgive me for not explaining any more, but it is an extremely delicate subject for you and for me. I ask you to see that justice is done now that this is in your possession. Signed, Hilario Rojas. No date. Initial interviews of Hilario Rojas. T8 advised that upon interview on January 10, 64 at Guadalajara, Mexico, Hilarius Rojas Villanueva, Manuel Acuna 1367 Guadalajara advised that in June or July of 1962, he was approached by an unidentified Cuban in a park in Mexico City. He claimed this Cuban talked to him about smuggling Cuban propaganda into Mexico and promised to see him later in Guadalajara. Rojas related that the Cuban arrived in the Guadalajara by automobile about the middle of August 1962, and the two of them drove by automobile to Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico, across the border from El Paso, Texas. On this trip to Juarez, he was introduced by this Cuban to an individual whose name he could not recall, but whom he recognized later by photograph as Lee Harvey Oswald. He stated that after their meeting, the three of them discussed the introduction of pro-Castro propaganda into Mexico via Cozumel, an island located off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. Rojas claimed that the following morning they left Ciudad Juarez on a flight of Aeronaves de Mexico Airlines and flew to Guadalajara after a stop at Monterrey Nuevo. After their arrival in Guadalajara, the Cuban gave him 400 pesos and told him he would receive further instructions at a later date. Rojas continued as follows. The latter part of December 1962, the Cuban visited him in Guadalajara, gave him 900 pesos, and on the instructions of the Cuban, he proceeded to Cozumel by bus, arriving there shortly after Christmas in 1962. In Cozumel, Rojas was met by two Cubans whose names he could not recall, and also by a Cuban whose first name was Cristina. Although he could not recall the names of the Cubans, he claimed to have them written in a notebook, which he left with Daniel Salas, a municipal policeman in Cozumel, and he was affirmed Salas would not deliver the notebook to anyone but him. About December 23rd, 1962, Oswald arrived in Cozumel, having proceeded there from Jamaica via Campana Mexicana de Aviación Airlines. Oswald, the three Cubans, and Rojas discussed the introduction of Cuban propaganda into Mexico. During the time of these discussions, Oswald and the three Cubans stayed at the Hotel Playa in Cozumel, and Rojas Rojas resided at the home of Daniel Solis, Solis. Oswald remained in Cozumel for 2 or 3 days and returned to Jamaica by air, and Rojas and the three Cubans remained in Cozumel until about February 15th, 1963, when Oswald again appeared in Cozumel from Jamaica. On this occasion stayed 3 days. The day following Oswald's arrival, an American by the name of Albert arrived from Jamaica. Rojas claimed that the Cuban woman, Cristina, told him that she and two other Cubans, Oswald and Albert, had discussed the elimination of President Kennedy. According to Rojas, she stated Oswald was in favor of killing President Kennedy, but Albert and the Cubans did not agree with Oswald. Rojas was told by Cristina that Oswald had stated to the Cubans that he and Albert had laid plans to eliminate the president. Albert had stayed at the Hotel Isleno in Cozumel and returned to the United States via Jamaica the day after his arrival in Cozumel. Rojas claimed to have stayed in Cozumel until early March 63, when he returned by bus to Guadalajara. T20 advised as follows. On January 21st, 1964, a check of Mexican immigration records pertaining to arrivals and departures at the island of Cozumel, Quintina Roo, Mexico at Merida, Yucatan, for the period of December 25th, 62 to February 63, disclosed no information for anyone with the name of Lee Harvey Oswald and the aliases of O.H. Lee and Alec James Heidel, or any information identifiable with the Albert referred to by Rojas or the unidentified Cubans. Re-interview of Rojas. T27, a confidential source abroad, advised as follows. On January 22nd, 23rd, 1964, Hilario Rojas Villanueva advised that he was born in Ciudad Manuel Doblano in the state of Guanajuato, Mexico, but he did not know the year and guessed it was about 32 or 33. He stated he also used the name Hilario Villanueva Rojas and explained that his mother's name was Estefania Rojas and that his father, whose surname was Villanueva, was not known by him, for which reason most of the time he prefers to use his mother's maiden name Rojas rather than his true name from his father of Villanueva. At this time, he furnished further background information concerning himself as follows. He completed the 6th grade at Ranch School in about 1949, traveled to the United States border and crossed illegally into the United States, where he was employed by El Centro, California, by a man named McIlvaney, phonetic, who had a drainage and irrigation business. He was arrested by the U.S. immigration authorities, but this agency allowed him to leave the United States voluntarily. Upon his return from the United States. He went to the ranch where his mother resides and remained there for approximately 3 years, after which in about 1957, he went to Tijuana, Mexico, where he was employed for approximately a year by a bottling firm which handled 7-Up. Prior to his departure from Tijuana, he had married his present wife, Maria Yolanda Cordova de Villanueva. After about 1958, Rojas had only odd jobs and stated he has worked part-time during the period of 1958 to 1964, with the specific preference of his alleged knowledge of Oswald and Albert and other unidentified Cubans on this occasion. Rojas advised as follows. About August 14th, 1962, he traveled to Mexico City, and while waiting in a park near the bus station of the bus line Estrella de Oro and the hotel where he stayed, he was contacted by an unidentified individual who he later learned was a Cuban, and at that time this person proposed that Rojas assisted him in smuggling Cuban propaganda into Mexico. About August 19th, 1962, the Cuban and Rojas departed from Guadalajara by air to the United States border at Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, where he was introduced to the person he later believed was to be Lee Harvey Oswald. At that time, Oswald was accompanied by 2 other Americans. Rojas claimed that the Cuban and Oswald discussed amounts to be paid for smuggling Cuban propaganda into Mexico thereafter, about August 21st, 1962, and he and the Cuban departed from Nuevo Laredo to Monterrey by bus, where the Cuban separated from him going to Mexico City while he, Rojas, continued to Guadalajara. About 3 or 4 months later, the Cuban arrived in Guadalajara, gave him 700 pesos, and instructed him to proceed to Cozumel for further contacts in connection with smuggling of Cuban propaganda into Mexico. Rojas departed for Cozumel and claimed that upon arrival in Cozumel, by accident, he met Daniel Solis, a policeman whose wife is Rojas's niece, and he resided at Solis's home during the entire time he was in Cozumel. During his stay in Cozumel, he again met Oswald, the unidentified Cubans, and one of whom was a woman by the name of Christina, and also met with the American named Albert. During this period, Oswald came to Cozumel by plane on 2 occasions, and during Oswald's 2 trips to Cozumel, the plot to murder President Kennedy was discussed. During his stay in Cozumel, he was friendly with a Mexican Air Force sergeant whose name he could not recall and whose assistance he sought to help him follow the activities of the Cubans Oswald and Albert. This person later identified as Leopoldo Torres Curtis, Mexican Air Force sergeant who was based at Cozumel Airport. He claimed to have left at the home of Solis a notebook which he alleged contained the names of the unidentified Cubans and the full name of the unidentified American named Albert. He stated that the Cubans and Oswald stayed at the Hotel Playa in Cozumel and that Albert stayed at the Hotel Isleno in Cozumel. Discrepancies in Rojas' story. T20 advised that on February 24th, 1964, a review of the register of the Hotel Playa at Cozumel failed to reveal any record of Oswald or any information identifiable with the Cubans mentioned by Rojas for the period of March 20th, 1963 through July 1963. It was also determined that the Hotel Isleno in Cozumel was closed from April to August 1963. On the same date, a review of the records of the CMA Airlines at Cozumel was conducted for the period from March 20th to August 1963, and no record could be located for anyone with the name of Lee Harvey Oswald or his known aliases. When interviewed on January 22nd to 23rd, 1964, the discrepancies with regard to the information he had furnished on January 22nd to 23rd, 1964, with relation to the information he had furnished on January 10th, 64, were pointed out to Rojas, who merely attributed the discrepancies to his lack of education. T8 advised as follows. On February 6, 63, Rojas produced a slip of paper which he claimed he had obtained from under the inner sole of an old pair of shoes, and he alleged the paper had recorded thereon the names of certain unidentified individuals concerning whom he had furnished information previously as follows. The Cuban woman, whom Rojas had formerly identified as Christina, is listed on the slip of paper as Christina Gadea, Gadea. The unidentified Cuban who he claimed to have met with in Mexico City, whom later claimed to have been traveled to Nuevo Laredo to Cozumel, is listed as Tony Ferrea, Ferrea. The individual referred to as the American named Albert is listed as Advin Walker, and the name of Lee Harvey Oswald, Osvvol, is listed. A review of the manifest of Aeronaves de Mexico Airlines de Guadalajara for August 3rd, 62, included a list for Hilario Rojas as having flown from Guadalajara to Monterrey on an Aeronaves de Mexico flight. However, this manifest failed to reflect a listing for one Tony Faria, whom Rojas identified as the Cuban who traveled to the border with him. T20 advised as follows. On February 24th, 64, at Cozumel, Daniel Solis advised he knows Rojas as Eladio Villanueva Ramirez. Solis produced Rojas's notebook, and it was observed that it did not contain the names of the unidentified Cubans as claimed by Rojas. Solis advised that during the period of time he stayed in Cozumel, Rojas did not engage in any unusual activities of any kind. He said he never saw Rojas in the company of any unusual strangers, nor in the company of any Americans or Cubans. Leopoldo Torres Cortez, a Mexican Air Force sergeant at Cozumel Airport, was contacted on February 25th, 64. Torres advised he became acquainted with Rojas when two of them arrived in Cozumel together in March of 1963. He related that he had associated with Rojas once or twice a week and that he had never observed Rojas in the company of a Cuban or an American. Torres stated that he never was requested by Rojas to keep watch over or cover the activities of anyone in Cozumel. Rojas had previously claimed that Torres had been of assistance to him in watching over the unidentified Cubans and the Americans. Rojas involved in Jacob S. Floyd matter. On February 21st, 64, Maria Esperanza Garcia, manager, Sanborn, Sanborns Airlines Office, Hamilton Hotel, Laredo, Texas, advised Special Agent Robert L. Chapman of the FBI that she handled ticket purchase order number A37240 with CMA on July 31st, 62, which reflected that the purchase order was made out to Hilario Rojas for an airline ticket from Guadalajara, Mexico to Nuevo Laredo, which was utilized by Rojas on August 4th of 1962. Garcia stated that she had received a telephone call during the latter part of July 62 from attorney Jacob S. Floyd, Alice, Texas, concerning the purchase of a round-trip ticket from Guadalajara to Nuevo Laredo for Hilaria V. Rojas. Garcia stated on July 31st, 62, she received a letter dated July 30th, 62 from Floyd enclosing a check for $60.64 of U.S. currency. This letter stated, I enclosed herewith a check for $60.64 covering a round-trip ticket for Hilario V. Rojas, Chilardo 665, Guadalajara, Jalisco. This trip is to begin August 4th and is from Guadalajara to Nuevo Laredo and return. The letter requested a refund if the ticket was not used and gave a resident's telephone number of Mohawk 4823 and office telephone as Mohawk 46561, Alice, Texas. The letter was signed Jacob S. Floyd and is out of stationery on the offices of Perkins, Floyd, Davis, and Odin. Garcia stated that she had also received a copy of a letter written by Jacob S. Floyd. You know something, guys? Guys in the chat, in the research chat, let's pull everything on Jacob S. Floyd and his relationship with Alice, Texas. This event just got way more interesting. Does anybody know why? Garcia stated that she had also received a copy of a letter written by Jacob S. Floyd to Rojas dated July 30th, 62. This letter advised Rojas that arrangements had been made for the district attorney and a good interpreter to meet with Rojas on Sunday afternoon, August 5th, 62 at the Plaza Hotel Laredo, and that a round-trip airline ticket was being sent to him through Sanborn as agent for Aeronaves Airline. It was pointed out in this letter that a $10 bill was being enclosed to Rojas to cover expenses for food and hotel in the event he could not make airline connections on the trip to Nuevo Laredo and had to stay in Monterey overnight. According to T17 on February 28, 64, District Attorney Sam H. Burris and Assistant District Attorney John C. Campos at Alice, Texas, advised as follows regarding their association with Hilario Rojas. Burros and Campos have been investigating the murder of Buddy Floyd since 1952. Rojas initially contacted the Floyd family in July of 62 by a letter addressed to Jim Wells County, Texas officials claiming knowledge of a conspiracy by Alfredo Cervantes and others to murder Floyd and suggesting a meeting with Jacob Floyd Sr. On July 23, 1962, Rojas wrote Floyd from Guadalajara offered to meet Floyd at the Mexican border if his expenses were furnished, as a result of which airline travel tickets were sent to Rojas. On August 5th of 1962, Floyd, Burris, and Campos met Rojas at the Nuevo Laredo Motel, Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. At the time, Rojas stated he owned a bar, Chapala, Mexico, where he knew Cervantes as a customer. Rojas stated Cervantes held a meeting with two Americans, Norman Neocon and Luis Fiano. God, why do I think that's a fake name? Norman Neocon. I'm not even joking. Neocon. And Luis Fiano, Feano. Let's see if we can't pull anything on those guys, who allegedly had hired Cervantes to kill Jacob Buddy Floyd Jr. Rojas furnished details descriptions of these men. Before this conference with Floyd and his associates began, Rojas demanded money, but this was refused until information of value was received. At the end of the conference, Rojas was paid $40 by Floyd in addition to expenses and was left at the Nuevo Laredo Motel. The investigation of this matter was turned over to Burris by Floyd. Burris then wrote to Robert Adams, American consul Mexico City, in this regard. On September 13, 1962, Adams reported investigation in this matter failed to verify the story related by Rojas. He advised that no information was developed concerning Neocon, Fiano, or anyone fitting their descriptions driving a red Buick as described by Rojas. Adams further reported that inquiry revealed Rojas was considered irresponsible and lazy, and that he had apparently learned of the Cervantes case through an associate in Guadalajara. On August 16, 1962, Rojas, in a letter to Burris, claimed that United States customs officers had beaten him up on August 5th of 1962, which allegations Burris subsequently determined to be false. Rojas again demanded more money and constantly did so, which money was not furnished. Burris stated Rojas did not furnish any information which could be verified. The last letter received from Rojas was dated November 5th, 1963, in which he again pleaded for money, but this letter was not acknowledged. Burris and Campos considered Rojas to be a liar and a person who attempts to exploit others for money. District Attorney Burris advised that he has in his files all correspondence and records pertaining to this matter, which he would gladly furnish if needed, and that he would be willing to testify at any time concerning these matters if such testimony would be needed. Rojas' admission of fabrication. T-29, a confidential source abroad, advised as follows. On March 5th, 1964, at Guadalajara, Mexico, Rojas orally admitted that he had never known or met Oswald anywhere. On March 5th, 1964, Gennaro Alfaro Lopez and Captain Esteban Lopez Garcia, agents of the Mexican Federal Security Police at Guadalajara, interviewed Rojas. They questioned Rojas concerning his allegations of knowing an alleged assassination plot against President Kennedy and of having met Oswald, Albert, and other unidentified Cubans in relation to this matter. At the time, Rojas admitted that he had fabricated the information. On March 5th, 1964, at Guadalajara, Alfaro and Lopez obtained a signed statement from Rojas, who has been pointed out also using the name Eladio Villanueva Ramirez. His statement, as translated from Spanish, is as follows. At Guadalajara, Jalisco, 1:30 p.m., March 5th, 1964, before Gennaro Alfaro Lopez and Captain Esteban Lopez Garcia, agents of the Federal Security Police, a statement was taken from Eladio Villanueva Ramirez. He stated his name was Eladio Villanueva Ramirez, born Rancho Guayajabo de Santa Rita, municipality of Ciudad Manuel Doblado in Mexico. He's married, 30 years of age, Mexican nationality, presently engaged at his home in the making of huaraches, Mexican native footwear. With respect to the letter which he had written to Robert Kennedy, Attorney General of the United States of America, Villanueva stated as follows. The information in said letter, as well as his oral statements to various United States government officials at Guadalajara, are false and were fabricated by him personally, and that he obtained the various names and details of the information from local newspapers. Further, that the foregoing was done in the hope of obtaining a reward. He is willing to testify to this statement if necessary and places his signature and fingerprint on this statement to confirm its veracity. Villanueva signed to this statement the name Eladio Villanueva Ramirez on the margin thereof, and also placed an inked fingerprint impression on the same margin. Alfaro and Captain Lopez advised that Rojas admitted that the trip had been made to the border in August of 1962 was in the purpose of contacting Jacob S. Floyd, details of which have been previously recorded herein. Well, some interesting intrigue going on down in Mexico City. Seems like a lot more than meets the eye, none of it involving Oswald, of course. But that's going to do it for today, guys. We'll be back tomorrow where we're going to wrap up this set of documents and we will move on to something else. So I have signed copies of my book. If you're interested, email me or message me on Telegram. They're $50 shipped in America. So that's it for me, guys. Talk to you soon.